So early on in my HR career, it's like, well, let me look that up in the policy. Okay, that's not what the policy says. And and it took me a few years, and once I was promoted eventually to HR director there at that company, before moving on into subsequent roles, that there's not a rule book or a playbook you cannot practice HR like that.
Welcome back, everyone, to the MISHRM Resource Partners Podcast. Glad to have you once again. I'm your host, Greg Coyne, and today we have a very special guest. We have Elizabeth Williams from Rehmann. She is the principal for HR Outsource Resources. Some of the reasons that we have different guests on is to give different perspectives of the HR community. And one of the major reasons that I had Elizabeth on is her experience, but also that she is incredibly involved with MISHRM, and she is also the head of the Greater Ann Arbor chapter for SHRM. Thank you again for being with us, Elizabeth.
Well, thanks, Greg. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. And why don't we just dive in with a couple things, because you have a vast experience when it comes to HR, and we have a lot of different people that are watching the podcast. Some that are HR leaders, some that are business leaders, but they may not have the quite the understanding of HR. And so, just from your knowledge of HR, why is it important? Why should it be something that companies really take a serious look at?
Well, first and foremost, you're dealing with people. And the second part, especially for small to mid-sized companies, that infrastructure, there's compliance and laws and things of that nature. And just from the ground up, building a very healthy, engaging culture. So HR touches on all those points and many more, but it starts with the people.
I love that answer, and it's for a couple of reasons. One is, I know I mentioned it, you just have taken a new leap over to Rehmann, and you mentioned this word a couple times. You said culture. So tell me a little bit more about that. What even got you to this position, and how did culture feature into that?
Sure. Well, I've been in a consulting role before, like I am now, consulting for companies for their HR needs. So I've been in and out of a lot of different businesses, different industries, and so I'm I can pivot very well. So culture to me, I'm able to withstand a variety of different cultures. Call it good or bad, I can pivot. But it was time for me to jump back into consulting, and culture is a big part of that. The Rehmann culture especially, I felt it was palpable immediately. I could feel it in their social media. I could see it in my interviews, which I talked with like 6 different people at different levels of the organization. Wow. And culture came up, and I could feel it during the onboarding, people welcoming me. So you know when the culture, there's something special, it kind of sizzles when you're, even in an email, you can feel it. So that was exciting. Like I said, I can pivot in any difficult environment. Some cultures are difficult, but you get what you put into it, you get you get a lot out of it. So I've never been shy about working in some environments that maybe don't have that razzmatazz, right? That's okay. I'm there for the work. I'm there to make a difference. But I'm very pleased that the environment that I'm in now has that extra people factor to it. And that's important because we're serving other companies, and my space of it is just a slice. It's HR solutions. But it's my job to bring that to the clients to help them build their culture, take them a step further. So it's very important. If you want to put your company on the map, get the right people, keep the right people, it's all about the culture.
I love that, and because a lot of business leaders, they reference Peter Drucker, and they talk about how culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? that old saying, and you mentioned it there, and there's a bunch of HR professionals and business leaders on this, and so I guarantee that some of them are doing culture well, but they can improve on it. So what are some tips that you would generally give? I don't want you to give away the farm. That's not where I'm looking for as a consultant, but what's a direction that they should be headed towards in terms of writing their culture or making sure that they've got a good one? Sounds like Rehmann hit the nail on the head with it. How can their culture be expanded, or how can it be bettered?
Companies in general, I mean, I've worked in a lot of family-owned, generational, public, private equity held, and even global. We're all there for to further the mission of the company, right? And so you got to get everyone rowing in the same direction and focus on the common goals. Not there to compete and one up each other. So it takes a while to change the direction of a culture. I've been in a couple environments where I had to be really patient. A lot of change was needed, but you can't just flip a switch. You know the story of how do you boil a frog, right? You have to turn up the temperature very slowly so they don't jump out. And the same thing with people. If you introduce too many changes, it's outside of their comfort zone. People don't like change. I mean, come on. I obviously do because of the different things that I experience in my professional and personal life, but change is hard. So I'll give one example of one company. I made incremental changes to win over the employees. It was a top HR role through small incremental changes. And slowly the culture moved the dial quite a bit. They were family held and went through some other iterations where they were no longer like that family company. But they had that culture. People working there for even decades, and so their way was what they knew. How do I evolve that and bring it up so that way new people can come in and be interested? So, and new systems and automation, all these things in HR that we like to get rid of the paper, right? And new processes. So it took me about a good year biting my tongue and just learning the processes that they had, and then gaining their trust. I think trust is a huge thing to change a culture. The people have to believe you. Right? You can't be coming in and changing everything. You have to understand where they're at, where the company wants to go, gain that trust, and the leadership as well. Lots of transparency is needed. And then you're able to move that needle. Then you can take bigger leaps with your projects, because now you have the buy-in, hopefully, of upper management in the C-suite to invest that money that you need with an HRIS system, with all the modules that are needed to automate it, to make onboarding easier. And then you go into employee engagement, and that affects the culture. So it's not really the types of projects or donut day or massage chairs. All those things are great, but you really have to start with trust and where are the people at. One of my first consulting jobs that I had way back when, I don't know, it wasn't way back when, but it was maybe like 8 or 9 years ago. And my very first client that I had doing HR consulting, I was brought in as a referral from the companies. They had an executive coach, which is great. They brought that in for their leadership team to help them move the needle. And so he brought me in because it was time for them to address some of the HR practices. So I come in, my first consulting job, and there were things that needed to be fixed, but they weren't quite ready yet. And I just remember that executive coach, we went out to lunch, and he's like, what's bothering you? I said, they need to do all these things, and I'm not getting their buy-in and understanding about why this is important. And there's so much though, right? You can't take the whole kitchen sink and, you have to take it incrementally, right?
Right.
And so he explained to me, he said, if you would have saw them a year ago, you wouldn't believe it. They have come so far in a year. So just hang with it, focus on what you can change, and know that, of course they can get better, and they know they can, and they're committed to it. But there can only be so much change, especially a leadership team, that's gonna stay. You can certainly have change in a company if you change the entire leadership team, but that's not ideal. It takes time to evolve, and they have to grow too, right? It's a learning curve for them, a development, career learning curve for them as well. So that's my biggest advice.
Oh, I love it. And what I also love is the fact of there's a lot of passion behind your statements. And so what I want to find out too, obviously HR is something that inspires you, but what makes you feel inspired in this? I mean, you've crossed lots of different paths, lots of different industries. What inspires you?
I'm a very creative person.
Yeah,
I have a musical and theater background that I wish I could do more with, right? But so because it's part of one of my traits, it's like a character trait, right?
Yeah.
It comes out in other ways. So how can I, in business, brainstorming, right? If I'm with a CEO or a CFO or an HR leader, and we're talking about how we can, what can we do? And it's that brainstorming, getting to know them, and what if we did this, or they come to me with an issue and I can tailor it to what they need. To me, that is a creative outlet, and that fuels me.
Yeah.
To help to know it's making a difference. It's sticking. I go back and circle around. I keep in contact with the companies that I've worked with, people that I've worked with. I just chatted with someone yesterday from one of the companies, and
really,
it's great. I think it's important you stay in touch with your network, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's I have a very broad HR network, and I'm very proud of that because I want to help HR people, and I want to see them succeed. Then if they're in sales or whatever it may be, coworkers that I've kept in touch with, and maybe they're a job or two away from where we last worked, and we reconnected, and now what synergies can I help you with, because now they're in a new position where they could use it. So you never know who you can help, you never know who can help you. So I think it's important to just foster those relationships, and I just stay in touch with people on LinkedIn. You congratulate them when they have a new job, or they check out your profile updates, and I love being involved in the HR community. It's very important to me to further our industry. It's not just all about me and my work. How can we further this industry? HR has come a long way.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
I've been practicing HR now for 22 years. And gosh, the time has flown by. But there's still some things that I go into some companies, it's like, wow, they're still on paper, or they still call it personnel. So there's more work that can be done. There's more mindsets that can evolve. And there's more HR professionals out there that just need a little bit more, they need a sounding board, right? So I pride myself on helping my friends. This is my saying, and I say it to HR professionals all the time, even HR needs HR. Because there's certain things we can't talk about at work. You can't talk about it, and you don't want to always bring that stuff home, because, work, who wants to come home and complain to your spouse or your family? And would they understand? Probably not, right? So it's important that HR folks have other people to talk to and use as a sounding board. And in some cases, it's even to be able to talk to their leadership, right?
Yeah.
We know we have to make this change. It's a difficult change. It's gonna be better for the culture, but it's painful. But you got to rip that Band-Aid off sometimes. How can I do this? So I'll have a couple private coaching sessions over Zoom with some of my HR friends, like, tell me what's going on. And we role play it even and talk about it.
Nice.
And I love it. Like the next couple days later, I get a text that says, I followed your advice and it worked.
Imagine that.
Because you just have to have that extra push, that extra, you can do this, because it's not easy. We know in HR, we have a difficult job to do. And some of us brace ourselves for having those difficult conversations with employees, but we are in a position where we're in a position of authority or leadership to have those difficult conversations, right? They're not pleasant, but we have to have them. Trying to pitch something to upper management that is the right thing to do, especially when the leaders of your company need to evolve their mindset or behavior, and you're the one in the hierarchy that you're trying to affect change upward, that's difficult to do.
That's an understatement. And so what I love is the fact of, so I talked about your passion, I asked about your inspirations, you delved right into it. So let me circle back on that. You talked about MISHRM. I mean, that's how we've met.
Yeah.
That's why we're on here today. How has it influenced a bit of your career, as well as part two to the question? Mm-hmm. When someone is in MISHRM, there's probably some brand new or newer members. Like, how has it not just shaped you, but how could someone else in the HR community be shaped through MISHRM?
This is my belief about why we are in MISHRM, why we participate in HR events and so forth. This is my philosophy as president of the Greater Ann Arbor SHRM chapter. We come together to support each other in the HR network and to network, number one, for job opportunities and so forth. But we also are there for education, to get our recertifications, and it should be fun, right? So fun,
yes.
Education, networking. So for me, MISHRM has been all of those things,
yeah.
and me, it's a way for me to give back to the industry. And most importantly, it has given me an opportunity to grow my leadership skills.
Ah, okay. I like that because you've talked about all of these things and you've got a huge understanding and a grasp of HR. And in my experience, sadly, I feel like the HR community is underutilized. It's kind of a second thought too often. And when it is used, it's overstressed and overworked. And so you've learned a lot of different things. One of the things that we connected on is you're very straightforward. I never have to worry about where you stand on something. We speak to it, and I appreciate that. And so what I want to understand from you is, through all this experience, what have you learned most from your career? And what was kind of that career like before you learned it? I'm kind of curious, because these are great tools that you're bringing to us today. And I want to tap into some of that experience for everyone online.
Sure. Well, when I started out I started my HR career in 2000, and I kind of fell into it by accident. I quit my executive secretary role that I had in my corporation, and I was going to go back to my former employer in some type of a internal customer service role. I can't quite remember now.
Okay.
And the VP of HR said, "Hold on a minute." And next thing you know, I'm being interviewed for an HR generalist position. And honestly, I learned HR not in a textbook. I learned it all on the job.
Really?
I haven't told this story in a while, but everything I know about HR, I learned hands-on. And back then, it was compliance and laws and learning all about benefits administration and workers' compensation. There are rules and procedures and things that you follow when you refer to the handbook. So early on in my HR career, it's like, well, let me look that up in the policy. Okay, that's not what the policy says. And and it took me a few years, and once I was promoted eventually to HR director there at that company, before moving on into subsequent roles, that there's not a rule book or a playbook you cannot practice HR like that. You really have to stretch. And how can we achieve? This is my mindset now with clients, and even in the companies that I was the HR executive working there.
Okay.
What is the end goal that the CEO or the manager wants to reach? And how do I get them there in the most compliant way and legally sound? Yeah. Because in some cases, they're going to do what they're going to do. If you have a business owner who it's his or her business, and they want to exit someone or they want to hire someone, our job is to explain the pros and cons and the pitfalls or the upsides, and to get them there in the most legally sound way to mitigate risk. And so it's made my thinking pivot, and it's not black and white. It is an art form. Yes. And I think I might have missed my calling. I should have gone into psychology, because how it started in 2000 and how it's gone to 2022, I use a lot of psychology, and I infer a lot I can't say I can figure people out like that, but so many years in the patterns and people's behaviors and getting to know them a little bit better, there are patterns and predictions that I can make that help me make decisions of how to deal with difficult employee situations. And now I am able to take that, because it's all stacked up over time. I didn't open this in a textbook. It's just through practice. And how to deal with people, right? And in HR, we deal with the good and the difficult. How do you maneuver those difficult conversations? I've written a presentation, a workshop on how do you handle daunting terminations, because it's not black and white. And the reason why I say daunting is you don't know what's going to happen on the other end. How can you get there as safely as possible to mitigate risk for the company, for yourself, your own safety, as well as the employee? When that end goal, that's the end goal, how do you get there safely? So in that instance, an example of that, that's how I use psychology and doing kind of like a behavioral analysis of the person leading up to that, and to best determine how I think it may go so I can plan it accordingly. So that's one example, but psychology is very important. How can we best communicate to someone to either get our point across, or how can we best pivot our style so that way we get to the end result that we need with the least amount of risk possible.
And that is a key component. The risk, the legality of it all, huge steps in the right direction. So Elizabeth, first of all, thank you for being here today. Very much appreciate it. A couple things before we wrap up.
Sure.
There are a ton of people, I guarantee, on this podcast that are like, hey, how do we get in touch with Elizabeth? All right. We were talking before the start on ways to be able to reach out to you. I know, being the chapter president of the Greater Ann Arbor chapter is one, but how can people reach out and get in touch with you?
Sure. Oh, well, I'm go to the MISHRM website, Greater Ann Arbor SHRM, GAASHRM.org, and all of the board of directors are listed there. And I'm on LinkedIn. I know Elizabeth Williams is a common name, but we're all connected by second or third degree, like Kevin Bacon, right? You'll find me, and so definitely feel free to reach out to me. I want to help other HR professionals with where you want to go, and not everyone wants to jump to their next job or their next one or continue to climb. What's the right fit for them? So however I can help through where they're at now or where they'd like to go, and I'm always looking to collaborate with other HR professionals. That's why I'm part of an HR chapter.
Well, and I think the biggest thing is in getting to know you as well, and I consider you a friend, those are not just empty words, all right? It's something that you seriously, when you say those things, you mean it. And I think that's a different approach than some other people are used to. So definitely take Elizabeth up on that. Thank you again for being on here. Love to have you again sometime.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, everyone, very much appreciate you all being with us on the MISHRM Resource Partner Podcast today. Again, I'm your host, Greg Coyne, and that's me signing off. Have a great one, everyone. Thanks for joining us.